Hi, I am the unpopular philosopher, and today we will talk about Russia, who is recently becoming the most powerful failed state, as a war with no end is grinding down Putin's resources and a series of various problems intertwine. So let's have a look at them and let's understand why Russia is a failed state. Let's start with politics. Russia was never able to democratize. Russia had a long history of authoritarianism, but unlike other countries, every attempt at democracy failed. The first attempt in 1905 was culled in the blood of those who dared oppose Tsar Nicholas II, as he used internal divide to retake control and easily abuse the Duma Russian parliament into working for him, under the threat of dissolving them as he pleased. The second attempt in 1918 led to a brutal civil war which not only costed the life of millions and set Russia back even further, but also establishing the Red Terror, which saw the death of the second attempt at Russia's democracy as the Communist Party in charge banned other political formations, arrested their members and began mass purges. As Lenin died in 1924, a power struggle between Joseph Stalin and Lev Trotsky would ensure, as Stalin took power and exiled Trotsky. Abusing Lenin's Red Terror system, he would make one of the worst dictatorships in history, as his death count is established at 20 million. Khrushchev tried reforming the Union with destalinisation, but failed when ousted by Leon Brezhnev. In 1980s the Soviet Union was collapsing and would see one last reformer, Mikhail Gorbachev, with the perestroika. Unfortunately, too much events collided with one another and Mikhail Gorbachev found himself ousted by Boris Yeltsin. What followed was one of fastest privatization efforts on the world, making Russia one of the most unequal countries in the world, following an enormous increase in corruption and the Russian mafias becoming the most powerful crime syndicate in the world. In this chaos, a relatively anonymous successor to Yeltsin would emerge, Vladimir Putin. In the 30 years that followed, he straightened the security services, removed the mandate limit by turning around it in the Medvedev Putin, and by giving himself and the oligarchs, rich businessmen, powerful criminalords or fellow elite members like the church, large chunks of power and immense wealth. Needless to say, democracy is more than dead, as they always win every election. Social issues. Russia faces numerous social issues which hamper their development of its economy. One of the many is that Russian citizens are very poor and barely survive by. While we may see a better living conditions on the big cities where elites live, majority of Russia's citizens live in squalor and poverty, and most lack a degree or superior education, most often then not being unemployed. As if that wasn't enough, Russia has one of highest rate of alcoholism, unliving and drug overdose deaths and addiction, as Russian men live 10 years less than women on average. In addition to that, there's also one of the highest homicide and crime rates in the world. If that wasn't taking out of the equation a lot of peel, Russia is also stuck in a war with Ukraine, which has costed them around 600,000 soldiers. Doesn't help the fact Russian population is shrinking, as they have a very low birth rate, alongside the mass migration of people to other countries to avoid being drafted or for a better life. Adding to this crisis, in the future there could be rebellions by minority ethnic groups which may seek larger autonomy, independence, or to fight other oblasts. The most famous of them is Kadyrov's Chechnya, a Muslim minority living in the Caucasus, who tried rebelling multiple times. So technically speaking, Russia could be a time bomb ticking towards population collapse. Economy. Russia's economy is mostly an extractive one. Russia's economy is mostly based around resource extraction, as the nation owns large reserves of oil, coal, natural gas, titanium, nickel, gold, aluminum. While yes, it was industrialized during Soviet times, it was mostly what's called heavy industry, which does not produce a lot of consumer goods necessary for a large base consumer economy. After Soviet collapse, privatizations under Boris Yeltsin led to one of the most unequal societies in the world, as a very restricted minority was able to buy off most of the state production apparatus and made billions out of it. The economy has been growing largely because it was destroyed in the 1990s, and thanks to the world's energy needs, Russia was able to enormously increase their national budget. It all came to an halt with the invasion of Ukraine, as sanctions imposed by the West greatly diminished GDP growth rate and raised the prices of a lot of products, making it harder for the average Russian citizen to be able to afford a decent living. Oligarchs were also hit horrendously hard, as their bank accounts and asset was frozen in the West. The only solace for Putin was that China and India abused the oil cap to buy large quantities of oil, giving Russia some breathing space in the harsh war against Ukraine and the West, at the cost of making them dependent on Chinese exports to be able to survive. Military. The Russian military, despite being on paper the second strongest army in the world, faces significant challenges, both systemic and directly related to the ongoing war in Ukraine. Systemically, the Russian military has been plagued by corruption, which has hindered the modernization of equipment and maintenance of infrastructure. This has led to a reliance on outdated weaponry, which underperforms compared to NATO forces. The mismanagement of funds allocated for modernization has further exacerbated these issues, leaving the military underprepared for high-intensity combat situations. These systemic problems have been amplified by the war in Ukraine, where the Russian military has struggled with poor logistics, insufficient training, and low morale among troops. The conflict has also revealed issues with command and control, as well as the failure to adapt to modern warfare tactics. Despite initial assumptions of a quick victory, the war has drawn attention to the military's inefficiencies, forcing Russia to increasingly rely on conscripted soldiers and auxiliary units. Additionally, the sanctions imposed by the West have hindered the military's ability to procure advanced technology and components, further weakening its operational capacity. To understand how bad the situation is going for Russia, they have been forced to request North Korea's help for receiving ammunition. Russia's army has also committed numerous war crimes, further increasing the local population resistance and supplies to Ukraine. In summary, Russia suffered all kinds of problems from the end of the 20th century to the start of the 21th. Any sort of progress that have been made into the economy, politics, army and demographics has been cancelled in the last 3 years, as a halted invasion of Ukraine and a low-intensity conflict has led to sanctions and slowly a collapse. If Putin's regime won't manage to solve the nation's problem, it's highly unlikely he will be in power for long, with all possible consequences of any scenario.